Appamada and its programs are supported by your generosity, and your generosity and support makes such a difference. You can find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org. Thank you.
Good morning. So, here comes an important person. That's my daughter. You're all important, but this is special to have her here. And have you noticed there aren't a lot of jokes being told these days? You know, which is kind of, you can kind of understand because of the times. But I thought I'd tell a joke. Well, not really. I'm going to show you a joke. This is from the New Yorker. It's a sign on a telephone pole, says missing my hair. So that's supposed to be funny. And then I didn't get to read Henry Miller's quote from yesterday because we don't have Zazen yesterday. If we have not found heaven within, it is certainly you will not find it without. Okay. You know, in the late night shows, they have all these little like pieces of paper. So I'm kind of doing that. About 3 or 4 years ago, in either Peg's or Flint's practice discussion group, I was talking about how I felt I was in a steel room and all I wanted to do was to find the door, not even to open it. And as I was sitting today, I kept thinking, I've been there in that steel room. And then I realized at the St. Louis Art Museum, there's a sculpture by Richard Serra, and it's a rectangle of steel that's about 6 feet high. Maybe it's 6 feet by 6 feet and about between 2 and 3 inches wide. And then this is going to sound a little strange, but I guess you're probably used to me saying things that are strange by now. Especially my daughter is, I'm sure. So I was in this Richard Serra sculpture that I think is in St. Louis. And it was these panels arranged around a perimeter, and you could get into the space, but there was just a little bit of space between the panels, and there was no doors. Okay, the strange part is there were pink flamingos all over. And I'm not sure if that was a dream or if they really were there, but I went with my friend Hans, and we talked about the pink flamingos. You know, the plastic ones that stick in the ground. It was very, very strange. So how that relates to all this is that the name of the book of koans that we read from in Soto Zen is called the Gateless Barrier. And another translation is the Gateless Gate, which I like a little bit better because it's more confusing. But if you can imagine, you're inside this barrier and there's no gate, and yet it's so hard to get out. The koan itself I'm going to read, and these koans were put together. They were old, called public cases, and they were put together by a man by Wumin. So he comments. So if the koan isn't clear enough, Wumin is sure to confuse you more. Once in ancient times, when the world-honored one, which is Buddha, was at Vulture Peak, he twirled a flower before his assembled disciples. All were silent. Only Maha Kashyapa broke into a smile. I want you to remember that as I talk, that he twirled the flower, and that was kind of something I had forgotten about. But when you twirl something, you show all sides of it. But also metaphorically, when you twirl something, all sides of something is not just in this moment, but from its being a seed to being a flower to being dirt. So he's showing all of the flower, not just one side of it. The world honored one said, I have the I treasury. Now, remember that word I, because I come back to that in my last drawing. I have the I treasury of right Dharma, the subtle mind of nirvana, the true form of no form, and the flawless gate of the teaching. It is not established upon words and phrases. It is a special transmission outside tradition. I now entrust this to Mahakashapa. So actually, at this point, the koan is very, very clear that the Dharma can't be expressed with words, and Kashyapa smiles and therefore understands it, and so he's going to be Buddha's successor. So how did I do 80 to 90 drawings about this every day, and how did I get so caught up in this? And well, that's the question. Woolman made this comment and assembled this somewhere about 1,000 years ago. And he says, so remember, his job was he was a very contemporary guy. And I mean, he could have lived today, and he wants to confuse you. He wants to make you think more about it. And he also wants you to laugh a little. Gold-faced Gautama insolently degrades noble people to commoners. He sells dog flesh under the sign of Mutin and thinks it is quite commendable. Suppose that all the monks had smiled. How would the I treasury have been transmitted? Or suppose that Mahakashapa had not smiled. How could he have been entrusted with it? If you say the I treasury can be transmitted, that would be as if the gold-faced old fellow were swindling people in a loud voice at the town gate. If you say the I treasury cannot be transmitted, then why did the Buddha say that he entrusted it to Mahakashapa? And then there's a verse that further confuses you. Twirling a flower, the snake shows its tail. Mahakashapa breaks into a smile, and people and devas are confounded. So woman wants to leave you with confusion. When I wrote this, this morning, koans are supposed to be public cases. I think of them as tricksters. Sometimes, like with the flower sermon, they are so obvious. The Dharma can't really be conveyed in words, so Buddha, in picking a successor, uses a secret handshake, and Kashyapa reaches out his hand with a smile. So how did I get taken over and over again, like if I was watching the pea and shell game? Flint said, how simple can you let this be? I told my wife this morning that you can't understand something until you are confused. Woolman attempts to confuse us with his questions. If we think we understand, we are deluded. And then my wife, who I lovingly call Mensa, told me this morning that finally you understand that it is as it is. She's been saying that for 51 years, but she always says it when my hearing aids are not in, so I do not hear her. The road takes you full circle. In the end, maybe you realize that a mountain is just a mountain after you so brilliantly discover that it isn't a mountain at all, but a host of myriad things. And then I came across this wonderful quote by Henry David Thoreau. We need the tonic of wildness. to wade sometimes in marshes where the bitter and the meadow hen lurk, and hear the booming of the snipe, to smell the whispering sedge where only some wilder and more solitary fowl builds her nest, and the mink crawls with its belly close to the ground. At the same time that we are earnest to explore and learn all things, we require that all things be mysterious and unexplorable, that land and sea be infinitely wild, unsurveyed, and unfathomed by us, because unfathomable. So this is kind of how I've been pursuing this this wild koan. And these drawings are, well, my blog is called Diaristic Notations. And right now I think there's 2,749 entries over about 10 years. And it's what I'm thinking each day. And you'll see that as I show you and read these, I might no longer agree with what I said or where I was. This is a painting, obviously, that someone did of Buddha holding up the flower. And it's so special to me that he's holding it with his fingers, because with your fingers, there's so much care. And you're going to see a different hand gesture in the last image I'm showing you, which I'm not sure is authentically Buddhist, but I found it. And think too that twirling this thing indicates its entire history with no beginning and no end. The hermit in the hut doesn't respond to the sexy granddaughter. The old woman throws him out and burns his hut down. The many monks don't respond to the beautiful flower. They don't become Buddha's successor. How is a Buddhist to behave in the face of the intoxicating beauty of a ripe flower? Do they reply as the hermit did? An old tree on a cold cliff, midwinter, no warmth? Big deals and little deals. Bertrand Russell said he used to worry a lot and then decided that whatever happened didn't amount to a hell of beans in relation to the vastness of the universe. Then there is the butterfly effect, where every little action, like turning off a light, can affect our Earth 100 years from now. Buddha holds up a flower. Was it really such a big deal, and why? And if you didn't know, that's a hill of beans. That's what they look like. We must make one mistake after another. Dogen. Buddha made mistakes before his enlightenment, following false teachers. Later, he didn't describe which of the rules which should be followed after his passing and which should be avoided. Caused great confusion. And he repeatedly denied women from being ordained until he finally didn't. He had to be asked many times. Yet, with complete confidence, he held up a flower so Kashyapa would smile. And I completely disagree with me here, that one thing caused the other, or that he did it so that Kashyapa would smile. I think "and" would have been a better word. He held up the flower and Kashyapa smiled. I thought about the 1,200 pages of monastic codes that I have, no longer needed at one Zen temple because they had another copy. Did the many monks make a mistake by not smiling? Did the hermit in the hut make a mistake by not warming up to the beautiful woman? There was, pardon my bloopers on TV years ago. At least then we learned to laugh at mistakes. When Buddha woke, he saw his past and future lives. it would seem he would see the outcome of his actions, thus shifting my experience of the koan. No longer is he wondering, what will happen if I hold up the flower? No longer is this a spontaneous act, nor is Kashyap's smile spontaneous if he too, a former Buddha, knows what will happen. Quandary, do I abandon this road because I don't like where it leads? And then I wrote, it all happened before it happened. And I was taking the deterministic view here that upset Peg quite a bit. And she said, no, 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 this isn't the way it is. So kind of an interesting con in itself is, can you both see the future and the future not be determined? So if someone figures that out, please let me know. I don't know. How do I respond to this opportunity to care? Even asking this question wastes time, but not asking can be dangerous. My story today is that Buddha looked out at the monks and saw that more words would be like tying weights to one drowning. So Mr. B held up a flower, saying, "Whoa, horsey, you need to stop and listen. Listen to the sound of one hand clapping." And Mr. K smiled. Basho was a great haiku writer, I think in the 17th century, had acquired kurumi, or lightness, an artistic spontaneity, which is the fruit of a lifetime of poetic cultivation. Buddha had this lightness when he held up the flower. And Kashyapa smiling as a recognition of that lightness or even humor came from that same boundless place. There was an element of play here in the best sense of the word, like in Blake's Organized Innocence. So William Blake, the poet, had this idea that you went from innocence, like a child, to experience, and then to organized innocence. So you come back to where you were. And in the drawing, Kashyapa is upside down, holding a beach ball and smiling, as Buddha's smiling too. But I don't know if the monks could see Buddha smiling when he held up the flower. And the beach ball has been very important to me because I had a philosophy teacher in college who said that you should imagine yourself like a beach ball floating in the ocean, and you can't determine where it's going to go, but you can just tap it little bits and change its direction. Alter its direction, not change it, just a little bit. So Shakespeare wrote, "All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players." The koan is a play. Buddha and Kashyapa didn't plan out their transmission. They didn't need to. They were so in tune that it was no surprise to Kashyapa that Buddha held up that flower, nor to Buddha that Kashyapa smiled. It had been scripted and characters had been cast. Ready, roll, action. Oops, film lingo. So here too, I'm pursuing the deterministic view, and which I don't agree with at all. But what I did is I took, if it was a thought that came in my head, I kind of explored it. That's kind of what I do, even though I don't agree with it. Buddha sat on Vulture Peak, barely visible to the half-mile of seated monks who couldn't clearly see him holding a flower, nor hear him declare, "It does not rely on letters and is transmitting outside the scriptures. I now pass it on." The story is beyond our imagination. Reducing it to a case of cause and effect is a sacrilege. It is silent and deafening. So you want to go there to Vulture Creek? Someone's got to shake their head yes. Okay, great. So this is Vulture Peak, where Buddha held up the flower, or rotated the flower, and there's Buddha up there, and Trouty had actually been there. So I asked her, could many, many, many monks also be there? And she said, no, there wasn't room down below. So anyway, we have to use our imaginations here. When one's friend loses a loved one, there is nothing we can say. The silence of the Buddha when he held up the flower was the silence of that elk. Here was the most perfect of all beings tragically struck down after a very short life. Kashypa's smile was not one of joy, nor was it one of sadness. It was an acknowledgement that the impermanence of life as it is all we've got, and that's okay. In the Jewish Shema, we hear we are to love with all our heart. Buddha's sidekick, Ananda, posited that spiritual friendship was half of the Dharma. No, said Buddha, it is the whole bit. So it is with the flower. It isn't different from the Dharma, but rather it is the whole Dharma expressed succinctly and without any words. Someone said today that form contradicted emptiness. No, I said, they are one. The flower is one with the Dharma, so subtle that it needs no words, just like love. And Buddha here is wearing a t-shirt and it says D equals F, which is Dharma equals flower. And the original sutras were all, you can see them in museums, like in the Houston Museum of Fine Arts, there's some, and they're about this big and they're painted, I suppose, on some kind of birch bark or something. They're written, and each sutra is an individual piece of wood, and that's what he's holding up with his other hand. When Mensa said, I like the drawing, I read that as she didn't like the text. I asked her why. She said it was too complicated, that a flower is just a flower. What else might be ordinary? Is Buddha just an ordinary man, for he said, I and all beings are enlightened? Was Kashyapa just a regular guy as well, maybe? Maybe it was his ordinary being that could simply smile at a flower. You know, there's that, I can't think of the name, but there's an English film about a gardener, and he's kind of a simpleton, and everyone thinks he's the wisest guy in the world. While I worked on the drawing, Mensa was planting flowers in our garden. Who was the Bodhisattva today? The rabbi said the reason women didn't need to study the Torah is that they were already living it. That's the Dharma to which Kashyapa was responding. It is the wisdom beyond wisdom. It is the smile, not just at the flower, not just at the teaching of and by the flower, but it is a smile of life itself. It is awe. And it is about that point where you don't have to learn another thing to do the needed work. We think we must get a little better and then we can save the world. No. I asked Mensa if Buddha holding up a flower was like breathing in, and Kashyapa smiling at the flower was like breathing out. No, said she. She said no, the other way around. Her argument was that you smell when you breathe in, which Kashyapa did before he smiled. Striking out again and then sitting this morning, I was struck by how far Buddha went out on a limb at Vulture Peak when he held up the flower, and how Kashyapa connected so intimately with him when he shot Buddha that smile, warm hand to warm hand. So, you know, to say the least, that's taking a big chance to hold up a flower and not say anything in front when you're talking to 80,000 people. I was so wrong in projecting what I saw when Buddha looked out onto the 80,000 monks. These were his children that he loved unconditionally, and they were his hope for the continuation of the Dharma. They were not drowning in the Dharma, nor were they swimming like fishes in the ocean. They were simply who and where they were. Though Buddha said he had never said a word, he kept on teaching, for much had to be spoken before one like Kashyapa could light up upon seeing a flower. There must have been a period of waiting before he held up the flower. That's fun for me to imagine. Like, how much time would you take? Would the guys almost be thinking, should I leave now? Nothing's being said, and then the flower gets held up. The timing was critical. It would have been just a little longer than what was comfortable. And as I read this over last night, I thought, no, not a little longer, much longer, really playing with that time. One could hear a pin drop as they waited for the Dharma to be spoken. The memory banks were open and shelves were cleared for new words. So there was no recording, obviously, and there was not even writing, but there was just memory. So they would.
Kim, excuse me, the images are not advancing. We're still on the rabbi and the reason women didn't study the Torah.
Is that true for everyone?
Yes. One just changed to there must have been a period of waiting.
Oh, okay, that's the one I'm on.
Okay, well, it just changed that now. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. The memory banks were open and shelves were cleared for new words. Anticipation was so thick that speech would have knocked the leaves off the trees. And then silence was broken with the display of the flower, and a quantumous being with no preferences. Did it advance?
Yes, Kim.
Great. I'm so angry I could kill him. Then we hopefully see the one who is angry. And I'm thinking, some of the monks might have thought this, and that doesn't make them, I guess the word less. We start to see the other as a precious human being and say to ourselves, God love them as we forgive our trespassers. In the flower sermon, the other monks missed the boat. Their expectation got the best of them. How long could they have held on to not being chosen? So they could have been bitter about this the rest of their lives, or could they follow that first thought of disappointment with the question, when is the next boat? That's the test of our practice. So after Kashyapa, there were many other people who were successors in the lineage. 2 women have babies on the same day. One is stillborn. Both claim the live one. That's wisdom in a sense, finding a clever solution to a difficult problem. Not a very good solution, but it was a little bit clever that they each claimed the baby. The women they start fighting, of course. The women go to King Solomon. He asks that the baby be cut in half. The real mother's love takes over and relinquishes her live baby. King S is exhibiting wisdom beyond wisdom, touching the heart and body of the real mother. Unlike the wisdom Dharma, the flower that Buddha holds up touches the heart and soul of Kashyapa. A heartfelt smile ensues. So this is like a bittersweet thing, this flower. It's not just beauty, frozen beauty. Neither Buddha nor the flower nor Kashyapa spoke. The Buddha had no own being, meaning that the flower did not generate itself or have essence. There are the 3 silences in the flower sermon. The Buddha said no words. The flower had no own being, no essence. And Kashyapa smiled. Dissecting a flower, one initially finds only parts. Dissecting the parts, there are just particles of dust. And these particles are 99 and 7 more 9% space. No essence, no words, no transformation. Still another mute. And it's interesting that I was recently reading about the experiencer and the experience, and how what we try to do is put aside the experiencer and just be in the experience. So the flower is absolutely able to do that because it doesn't, I don't think, it's not able to look at itself experiencing who it is. The War Department paid Langley $50,000 to invent the first airplane. His crew had engineering training, believing that flying was a question of power, as the 80,000 monks had faith in the power of their Dharma knowledge. You know, that's the trouble with knowing too much, is you think you have so much power that you can handle anything. The Wright brothers had no such training. They worked in a bike shop where unstable vehicles needed balance, the middle way, equanimity, not being caught by preferences. The flower was a contest between learned, powerful monks and a balanced Kashyapa acting without the shackles of the Dharma. Well, the Wright brother was able to succeed because they didn't have all this knowledge that the engineers did. His humiliation and false accusation is the same flower that the Buddha held up. We say that if you want to find a teacher, choose the person who gives you the most trouble. And here in the drawing, oh, I'm sorry. Here we go. There we go. Someone saying to you, you have 3 heads. And so they're making an accusation of some sort. And those, at soccer camp, everyone gets awards. Those aren't flowers. They're just non-awards that teach us nothing. Buddha's flower was a kind teaching for the many monks. Given the speed at which Kashyapa reacted with a smile, I assume he recognized this generous and perfect teaching. The Dharma is not the Dharma, the flower is the Dharma this time. Oops. Emptiness may be all of Buddhism. Believing that things arise on their own, that they don't change, and that they have a permanent essence causes our suffering. And you see how someone brings you some flowers and then they start to die, and then you start to suffer and you wish, oh, I wish they hadn't died. We go through this over and over and over again. The paint starts chipping from our house. We're so excited when we get our house painted, and then it starts chipping off and fading. And the flower embodies emptiness. It comes from a seed that comes from another flower. It changes with the blink of an eye. And whatever is its essence now is not what it was or what it will be. Are we any different than the flower, except that we often reside in our delusions, believing that we are more than 5 skandhas: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness? Kashyapa's smile is his comfort with just this. The flower is just what it is, as we are, nothing more than our skandhas, also called heaps. And I love the word heaps because it's kind of nothing special. So I mentioned earlier the I. I have the I treasury of right Dharma. So there's an I in Buddha's hand as he's holding it up, and he's twirling the flower. It says, Lord Buddha's hand with I holding lotus flower. So even his hand sees the flower. If you'd like, you could ask questions. Glad to see Paul. Paul must have a question.
You're muted, Paul.
Paul, wait, before you ask a question, I got to say something. I was reading about this great magician, and one of the people there was one trick he did with cards where he would ask you to think of a card and think of a number, and then you would go to the deck of cards, and that particular card was that number in the deck, and people couldn't believe he could do this. So one of the things they thought is, well, the person who he called on was a stooge. Like you and I have arranged this, right? Where you're going to ask a question, but we haven't done it, have we?
No.
Okay.
No, as a matter of fact, I was sitting there going, do I have a question? I got off on a tangent on one of your drawings, and it was dealing with the eye and this thing about how the Buddha could see in the future that Kashyapa was going to be the successor. And for some reason, it just popped in my head. So if you can see the future, when does it become the present? And I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but we're kind of taught that the past and the future don't exist.
Well,
And
in
so
Buddhism, actually, they're all one.
Okay.
The past, present, and future. So,
well, then that makes sense then.
Yeah, they're not separated like this was.
Okay.
This is going to be, and especially part of you, Paul, is your anticipation of what you're going to become. You carry that around with you every day. We all do. And what's going to become of the people you love? There's no way of avoiding that unless you have really serious dementia. I mean, I don't think so. I don't know what it's like, but I suppose that if, then you would only be in the present, and that wouldn't be very rich. And our past is the same way. It happened a long time ago. In fact, the first mindfulness workshop intensive that I took was at a Vietnamese temple, and I asked the monk, so can you think about the past in the present? And he went on for an hour, and I didn't understand anything he said except it was yes. So you can either be lost in the past, or you can bring it up to the present and realize it's part of who you are now. Okay, so I need to, here, if I change the view, I can see all of you. Yeah, Mary, but
I wanted you to repeat, I think it was a William Blake comment that you were saying about how, as children, we start out as our innocence, and then we go through a rotation.
Experience
to organized.
In a sense.
Okay. And it also reminded me once of what Flint said in terms of like enlightenment or whatever is that you have to like build a self first of all before you can lose it. All right. So that there was something I recall in one of his practice groups that he mentioned to that effect is that sort of you go through your suffering to achieve that again, that sense of no self. Can you speak to that?
Well, I've just been hearing that from those of you who are therapists, that you can't get rid of the self until you develop it.
Right.
And so
Like from an IFS perspective, it's like the essence of, the exiles or the child is in there. And then you build all these adaptations, all right? And then you start to recognize your adaptive parts and how necessary they were for survival. And then, but the sense of, when I'm 60 and what helped me when I was 6, maybe not so beneficial for myself or others. And so that's what it struck me, the similarities of, like, so you go to an organized innocence or more of self-leadership.
yeah, and that's why I think Kashyap's smile was really that organized innocence to me.
Mm-hmm.
He just was able to enjoy
Okay.
this beauty or whatever. And the one who experiences without the experiencer is also the organized innocence. When you're learning calligraphy, there's a lot of verbalization. There's a lot of things you're told that this mark going in this direction means this and this and this, and the same with my wife's tea ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has a meaning, everything is economical, but in the end, it's just a flow.
Okay.
But to get there, you have to go through this crud. You have to be in I think, a steel room, and you have to, just search first for where the door might be, and maybe you create the door, and then you realize there's no door, but there's just an opening. I mean, it all the series of steps, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, Rosemarie.
So I've been thinking a lot about all of the other monks, and and also the relationship between students and teachers. And the first thing is trust, right? So if they trusted the Buddha, and they're not a monolith, they're all in, each of them is in like a different place. And so if they really trusted him, they would trust to know that he's making the right choice. And also that what was my other thought about? Oh yes, that if they were so clinging to their desire to be chosen, then that's a question too. So I think my thought is, they're probably all in a different place with trusting him, and in with their clinging to what they, this position that they want. That they, that they're all different, and that, anyway, that's my thought.
Yeah, I think the Torah is a great example of people who are trusting God, but then not trusting. And in fact, when they go to get the Ten Commandments, Moses is a day late coming back, and they completely fall apart. So what happened to their trust there? Like, if you're not willing to wait one more day, they counted days in different ways, I guess, 30 days, 31 days, something. He didn't come back in time. And so they trust, and then they don't trust. And I think we all do that. But it's not the fact that, they're human beings, like we all,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Becky,
So I have another.
Yeah, I was actually going to say something like that as part of my understanding of what our trusting ever is that if we can hold ourselves somewhere where we try to only let our trust be based on what's likely, like not on what we want or what somebody even said in words, but that, for instance, a friend of mine, I might trust her to do what she's likely to do rather than necessarily what she said, right? And similarly, I think one of the things that we gift each other is to trust each of us to be human, and to notice in ourselves and each other that what that means is we're all learning, we're all changing. And so the impermanence factor is another really important aspect of trust, and also of knowing that we make up what we thought it was that we saw going on, and therefore we decide that that's what I'm going to trust. But one of the questions things I've been pondering since you posed it the other day, the concept of essence, and certainly the question, it's about the self, no self stuff, of course, right? Is do we as a person have an essence that may continue throughout us, but change in its qualities? Does the flower have a self essence? There are many ways to think about that. And I think it depends on what we think essence is. If it's our constructs of being, then we have it, and we absolutely don't have it. But if really what it is the relationship of all the energies, the life energy that is within some contained thing, whatever it is, whether it's one cell or a flower or a person, then there is a self that will continue, because the energy moves on in the universe, whether we're alive with it at that moment or not. And it has been changed in moving through us.
Yeah, it helped me, the idea that we're saying no permanent essence. But I do think it's more than that. Peg was talking to me about own being, and she saw it as a flowing river, which is more like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But if it's changing all the time, is it really something? I don't know.
And so the problem that you were having to figure out about the grammar in relationship to do you say past tense or current or what in relationship to a flower, that it is all of them.
I think so.
And so it's because the flower will be remembered by people that have been affected by it, and the flower will have changed energy in its moving on once it'll just have that same energy moving through other things and in different configurations. And that's itself.
Yeah.
Or was for a while.
Paul, did you want to say something again?
I'm finding the discussion fascinating. I'm going off on all these different thoughts all at the same time. Going through some of your drawings and the descriptions that you provided with each of them, I'm picking up on a theme, or maybe it's just my perception of it. And I was going to everything that we see and do, hear and understand is all couched in our own perception, our own language. And I tell my daughter this a lot of times, that we are meaning makers. We provide meaning for our experiences and that type of thing. You made a comment about about the experience and the experiencer, and we should try to get rid of the experiencer and just see the experience, kind of a thing. And I guess there's maybe a little bit enlightenment on that concept, but then we tend to transfer our feelings and thoughts to other things, such as the flower. And I think we're making an assumption, if I'm not mistaken, that the flower has no essence or no words for itself. But I'm wondering if it's just because we don't understand the flower's language so that it can speak for itself.
Yeah, so the jury's out on this.
Oh, okay. But can you talk a little bit about the experience and the experiencer and kind of clarify that a little bit?
Well, a car swerving around the corner, and I'm walking with my neighbor, and without being the experiencer, without thinking about what I'm doing, I pull him out of the way. So there I'm purely the experience.
Okay.
But a lot of times, like I imagined originally with this koan, that so Buddha woke up in the morning or maybe the night before, he thought, well, I have to pick a successor today. So I'm going to go and I'm going to stand up there and I'm going to hold up this flower. You know, and that he was all in his discursive mind. And that was my delusion. I think what he did was totally spontaneous, like the koan about washing the bowl. You know, the Buddha, the teacher, the student says, I want to learn about Zen. And the teacher said, have you eaten your breakfast? Well, then wash your bowl. I mean, it was one thing just followed the other. And trying to be there. You know, sometimes when I'm wheeling my cart through Central Market, that's our grocery store here. I'm somewhere else and I start hitting people, hitting things, knocking things over. You know, we all do that, don't we? Yeah, on a bad day. And there, the experiencer is you know, I'm not present. I think it's just another way of saying about being present, to be the experience. And you'd hope that like for example, if you were kissing someone, you would be into kissing them and not into, how am I going to kiss them? What, you know, on and on and on and on. You'd be somewhere else then. Okay, I think it's time to do our final service, and I hope we can dedicate this service to today to Marie's daughter Katie, who is having big surgery on Tuesday, and also to Claudine's daughter, who's nicely recovering and going to go home from the hospital tomorrow. Right, tomorrow? Yeah. So anyway, let's and for the welfare of all beings. So we will do this.